I still remember the exact moment my phone buzzed with that text message on a freezing December morning in Denver. Emergency. Your father collapsed. Come home now. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. But it wasn't fear that made them tremble. It was rage. Pure, white-hot rage. Because I knew this was another manipulation. Another lie in a 23-year pattern of lies. And I was done. Completely done. But before I tell you how I got to that point, before I explain why I didn't drop everything and rush back to save the man who was supposed to be my father, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story about family drama. This is about survival. This is about the moment you realize that the people who were supposed to love you have been using you as a bank account for your entire adult life. So if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered why you're always the one giving while everyone else takes, stay with me. Hit that like button. Subscribe. And drop a comment telling me if you've ever been the forgotten child. Because trust me, you're not alone. Now let me take you back to where this all started. Back to Christmas Eve. 3 months before that text message. Back to the night everything exploded. I was 23 years old, and I had spent my entire life trying to become visible to my father, Richard Blackwood. My mother died when I was 6 months old, and he remarried Victoria within a year. Then came Liana, my half-sister. When I was 2, from that moment on, I became a ghost in my own home. The house on Maple Hollow Lane was beautiful. A sprawling colonial with white columns and a circular driveway that screamed old money. But for me, it was a museum where I was never quite part of the collection. Growing up, I learned to make myself small. I ate dinner in my room because the family table was always full of Liana's achievements, Victoria's social calendar, and Richard's business deals. I wore hand-me-downs from distant cousins while Liana got shopping trips to boutiques in Boston. I learned to do my own laundry at age 8 because Victoria said she didn't have time. I made my own lunches, walked myself to school, and spent every holiday watching my family celebrate without me. The worst part wasn't the neglect. It was the gaslighting. Whenever I tried to speak up, Victoria would smile sweetly and say I was being dramatic. Richard would tell me I was too sensitive. Liana would cry and make herself the victim. So I stopped trying. I buried myself in books and dreams of becoming an architect, designing spaces where everyone would feel welcome, where no one would ever feel invisible like me. The summer I turned 18, everything almost changed. My grandfather Arthur came to visit from Denver, and it was the first time I had seen him since I was 13. Richard had always kept him at a careful distance, feeding me stories about Grandpa getting senile, about his dementia, making him confused and difficult. It's better not to upset him with too many visits, Richard would say, with practiced concern. At his age, too much stimulation isn't good for him. But when Grandpa Arthur arrived that July, stepping out of his sleek Mercedes with a leather briefcase and the confident posture of a man who had built an empire from nothing, I realized my father had been lying. There was nothing confused or fragile about this man. His eyes were sharp, assessing, taking in everything with the precision of someone who had spent 60 years reading people and situations. Those 2 weeks changed something in me. Grandpa Arthur had a way of watching quietly, of noticing the small cruelties I had learned to accept as normal. He saw me carrying my dinner plate to the kitchen on the first night, assuming my usual spot at the counter while the family gathered in the dining room. I had my fork halfway to my mouth when I heard his voice behind me. Aurora, why are you eating in here alone? I froze. No one had ever asked me that question before. Oh, there's not enough room at the table. It's fine. I prefer it here anyway. More peaceful. His jaw tightened, but he didn't push. Instead, he joined me, pulling up a bar stool and eating his dinner at the kitchen counter. We could hear Victoria's bright laughter from the dining room, Liana's animated story about her dance recital, Richard's booming voice discussing his latest business deal. And there we sat, Grandpa Arthur and I, exiled to the kitchen like uninvited guests. The next evening, he insisted I join them at the table. Richard looked annoyed, but couldn't refuse without seeming cruel. I sat at the far end, barely speaking, while Liana dominated the conversation with talk of her upcoming sophomore year at Ashford Academy, an elite private school that cost more than most people's annual salary. No one asked me about my college plans, even though I was graduating high school in 2 months. No one asked me anything at all. Except Grandpa Arthur. Aurora, your father tells me you're interested in architecture. What kind of buildings do you want to design? It was such a simple question, but it cracked something open inside me. I started talking about sustainable housing, about creating spaces where people felt safe and valued, about how architecture could heal communities. I talked for maybe 3 minutes before Richard interrupted. That's nice, honey, but let's be realistic. Architecture is a very competitive field. Maybe you should consider something more practical. Leanna, tell Grandpa about your acceptance to the summer arts program in France. And just like that, I disappeared again. But Grandpa Arthur's eyes stayed on me, and I saw something in them. Recognition. Enga? Understanding. The pattern repeated itself every day. Grandpa Arthur would try to include me, to ask me questions, to draw me into conversations. And every time, I would be interrupted, dismissed, or redirected back to Leanna's achievements and Victoria's social calendar. He watched Richard cut me off mid-sentence at least a dozen times. He noticed how no one bothered to ask if I wanted seconds at dinner. He saw Victoria hand Leanna a credit card for back-to-school shopping while telling me I should look for sales at discount stores. On his last evening with us, Grandpa Arthur asked if I would walk with him in the garden. It was sunset, the sky streaked with orange and pink, and the air smelled like roses and fresh-cut grass. We walked in silence for a few minutes before he stopped by my mother's memorial bench, a small stone seat Richard had installed years ago that no one ever used. Sit with me. Aurora. I sat. His weathered hands, marked with age spots and old scars from years of construction work, reached for mine. They were warm and steady, and I realized how desperately I had been craving a simple, genuine touch. I want to tell you something about your mother, he began, his voice thick with emotion. She was the strongest person I ever knew. Strong like steel, but with a kindness that could disarm anyone. When she married your father, I had doubts. I saw things in Richard that worried me. A certain emptiness behind his charm, but she loved him. So I supported her choice. He paused, looking at the garden, at the house where his granddaughter was being slowly erased. If your mother could see how they treat you, it would break her heart. No, that's wrong. It would enrage her. She would never stand for this. Tears burned my eyes. I had spent so many years convincing myself I was imagining things, that I was too sensitive, that normal families probably worked this way. Hearing someone finally validate my reality felt like being given permission to breathe after years of holding it in. Aurora, listen to me carefully. His grip on my hands tightened. You remind me so much of her. You have her eyes, her spirit, her creativity. Don't let them break that in you. Don't let them convince you that you're less than you are. You are extraordinary, and they can't see it because they've chosen not to. That's their failure, not yours. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card and an envelope. The card was simple, elegant. Arthur Blackwood, CEO, Blackwood Development Corporation, Denver, Colorado. The envelope was sealed. This is $5,000. I want you to use it for college applications, for deposits, for whatever you need to build your future. Don't tell your father. This is between you and me. He pressed both into my hands and closed my fingers around them. And Aurora, I need you to know something else. You always have a place with me. If you ever need to leave this house, if you ever need help, if you ever just need someone to see you, I'm here. Denver is here. A real home is here waiting for you. I broke down completely, sobbing in a way I hadn't let myself cry since I was a child. All the years of swallowing pain, of smiling through dismissal, of pretending I was fine with being forgotten. It all came crashing out in that garden. Grandpa Arthur held me and let me cry and didn't try to fix it with empty words. They're not going to change. I whispered when I could finally speak. Are they? No. Sweetheart, I don't think they are. And I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. Your father kept me away and I let him. I failed you, but I won't fail you again. Those were the first genuinely kind words anyone in my family had said to me in years. Maybe ever. When he left the next morning, I stood in my bedroom window and watched his Mercedes disappear down Maple Hollow Lane, and I felt something shift inside me. Not hope exactly, more like a tiny spark of possibility. A lifeline thrown to a drowning person. I used that $5,000 exactly as he intended. I applied to architecture programs, including the prestigious one at the University of Denver that I never thought I could afford. I got accepted to several schools and chose a decent state college 2 hours away. It wasn't my dream school, but it was affordable with financial aid and the 3 part-time jobs I immediately secured. A coffee shop, a campus bookstore, and weekend shifts at an architecture firm filing documents. When I told Richard I had been accepted and would be starting in the fall, his response was everything I had expected and nothing I wanted. "That's great. Honey, you know we'd love to help, but with Leanna's tuition at Ashford Academy, we just can't swing it. You understand? Right? She's got such a bright future, and we need to invest in that. But I'm sure you'll figure it out." Leanna's tuition at Ashford Academy was $42,000 a year. My state school would cost $18,000, including room and board. But I had long since stopped expecting equity or fairness. I just nodded and started planning my escape. College was hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not academically. I thrived in my classes, but financially and emotionally, I was drowning. I worked 25 to 30 hours a week while taking a full course load. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches to save money. I bought textbooks from seniors and returned them the same semester. I wore the same 3 outfits on rotation until they were threadbare. I skipped social events because I couldn't afford the cover charges or the drinks or even the gas to get there. But I was free, or as free as I could be while still tethered to the hope that my family might eventually care. I came home for holidays out of obligation and stupid optimism. Each time, I told myself maybe things would be different. Maybe they would ask about my classes or my designs or my life. Maybe they would notice I had lost weight from stress and poverty. Maybe they would see me. They never did. Thanksgiving my sophomore year, I arrived to find they had forgotten to set a place for me at the table. "Oh, we thought you weren't coming," Victoria said breezily, adding a folding chair at the corner as an afterthought. Christmas, my junior year. They opened presents while I was still in the bathroom. When I came down, and the living room was full of torn wrapping paper and new gifts, and no one had noticed I wasn't there. Every visit ended the same way. Me driving back to campus in tears, promising myself I wouldn't go back, and then inevitably returning for the next holiday because I couldn't quite kill that desperate, pathetic hope that maybe, they would finally love me. After graduation, I got a job as a junior designer at a small architecture firm an hour from Maple Hollow Lane. It paid barely enough to cover rent on a 400-square-foot studio apartment with unreliable heating and neighbors who fought loudly at 2 in the morning. But it was mine. My space. My life. Small and struggling, but completely mine. I kept Grandpa Arthur's business card in my wallet and looked at it sometimes, wondering what it would be like to just leave. To drive west to Denver and start over. But something kept pulling me back to Maple Hollow Lane. That horrible, relentless hope. That little girl inside me who still believed that if she was just good enough, just patient enough, just loving enough, her father would finally see her. By the time that Christmas Eve arrived, I was 23 years old and barely holding on. My apartment was so cold I slept in 2 sweaters and wool socks. My car was making concerning noises I couldn't afford to fix. I was surviving on a food budget of $40 a week. Meanwhile, I saw Liana's Instagram posts of her winter break in Aspen, Victoria's new designer handbag, Richard's photos from a golf trip to Florida, but I had spent 3 weeks creating something that felt important. A small wooden box, roughly the size of a hardcover book, carved by hand from reclaimed oak I had found at a salvage yard. I sanded it until my fingers ached, until the wood was smooth as silk. Then I inlaid small pieces of mother of pearl in the shape of a snowflake on the lid, each piece carefully shaped and fitted. It took hours upon hours of painstaking work in my unheated apartment. Inside the box, I placed 3 letters, each one handwritten on cream-colored paper, telling Richard and Victoria and Liana exactly how much I loved them despite everything. How much I wanted us to be a real family. How I was sorry if I had ever done anything to make them shut me out. How I hoped we could start over and build something real and honest and whole. Reading those letters now, I can see how desperate I was. How thoroughly I had been gaslit into believing their treatment of me was somehow my fault. But at the time, that wooden box felt like my last chance at reconciliation. My white flag. My disparity. Humiliating plea to matter to the people who were supposed to love me. I drove to Maple Hollow Lane on Christmas Eve, with that box sitting in my passenger seat and my stomach in knots. Every red light felt like a warning to turn around. Every mile closer felt like walking toward my own execution. But I kept driving because hope, even the foolish kind, is hard to kill. The house looked like something from a magazine when I pulled up at 7 p.m. Every window blazed with warm golden light. White lights were wrapped around the columns and lined the roof. A massive wreath hung on the door. The circular driveway was packed with expensive cars. BMWs and Mercedes, and one Porsche that probably cost more than I would earn in 5 years. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic with the rattling engine and peeling paint, and I almost couldn't get out. I could hear music and laughter even through the closed windows. I could see shadows of people moving inside. Champagne glasses raised. Everyone dressed in their holiday finest. I was wearing a thrift store dress I had bought for $8. Tights with a run. I had carefully stopped with clear nail polish. And boots. I had resoled myself because I couldn't afford new ones. I didn't belong there. I had never belonged there. But I looked at that wooden box with its mother-of-pearl snowflake, and I thought about all the hours I had spent carving and sanding and hoping. I thought about the letters inside. Raw and honest and probably pathetic. And I thought, one more time. Just try one more time. The door opened before I could even knock. Victoria stood there in a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Perfectly styled hair. Makeup that looked professionally done. Her smile was practiced, polished, and completely empty. Aurora, you came? How nice. Not a hug. Not even a touch. Just that cool assessment and the slight surprise in her voice. As if my presence at my own family's Christmas gathering was unexpected. She stepped aside, a silent permission to enter my childhood home like a stranger. The foyer smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon candles and pine. Warmth and festivity and belonging. All the things that had never been meant for me. I clutched the wooden box against my chest like a shield and followed Victoria toward the sounds of the party. The living room was packed. I recognized some faces vaguely. Uncle James and Aunt Patricia, who I hadn't seen since I was 12. Richard's business partner Marcus and his wife Elena. The Hendersons from next door. A dozen other people in expensive clothes holding crystal champagne flutes. Everyone glowing with that particular satisfaction that comes from a life of comfort and security. And there, at the center of it all, was Liana, 21 years old and absolutely radiant in a red velvet dress that hugged her perfectly, her dark hair in elegant waves, her makeup flawless. She was showing something on her phone to a circle of admirers, laughing that bright, careless laugh of someone who had never known a moment of real struggle. And this is the Louvre at sunset. She was saying, we spent 6 hours there, and I still didn't see everything. Paris is just incredible. I'm thinking about doing my senior year abroad there. Daddy says he can probably arrange it through his business connections. Everyone murmured approval. Richard stood by the fireplace in a navy suit that probably cost $2,000. His arm around Victoria's waist. Both of them beaming with pride at their perfect daughter and their perfect life in their perfect house. I stood in the doorway in my thrift store dress, holding my hand-made box. And I waited. Waited for someone to notice me, to acknowledge me, to remember I existed. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The conversation flowed around me like I was a ghost. I watched Liana show off more photos. I heard Richard talk about his latest development deal. I saw Victoria graciously accept compliments on her hosting. Not once did any of them glance in my direction. I was invisible. Again. Always. I was about to set the box on the entry table and leave. To spare myself this humiliation one final time, when the front door burst open behind me, cold December, air rushed in, sharp and shocking, cutting through the warm, perfumed atmosphere. Where is everyone? I made it back in time, a familiar voice. Strong and full of life. I turned, and my breath caught. Grandpa Arthur. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. Richard had told me he was declining rapidly, that his dementia was getting worse. that traveling was too difficult for him now. He sent me brief, formal emails every few months, saying Grandpa sent his love but couldn't really handle visitors anymore. I had believed it. I had mourned the loss of the one person in my family who had actually seen me. Even as I sent him letters, he apparently never received. But the man standing in the doorway looked nothing like the fragile, declining old man Richard had described. Grandpa Arthur was 82 years old, and he stood straight and tall in a beautiful wool coat, his silver hair neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp and assessing. He looked robust, healthy, powerful. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had built a $50 million real estate empire and still ran it with iron will and brilliant strategy. His eyes swept the crowded room and found mine immediately. Instantly, like he had been looking for me specifically, and his whole face transformed. The formal, careful expression melted into pure joy and relief. Aurora. He pushed through the crowd without apology, expensive coats and champagne glasses moving aside for him. And before I could process what was happening, before I could prepare myself or put on a brave face, he pulled me into the tightest, warmest hug I had received in 5 years. I felt something crack open in my chest. Something that had been frozen and protected and carefully guarded. His arms were strong around me, and he smelled like coffee and cedar and safety. Real safety. The kind I had forgotten existed. My beautiful girl, he said into my hair. I've missed you so much. Did you get my letters I wrote you every month? Letters. He had been writing me. Every month. And I had never received a single one. The living room had gone completely silent. Every conversation had stopped. Every eye was on us. I could feel Richard and Victoria staring. I feel the shock and confusion radiating from them. This was not part of their plan. This was not supposed to happen. Grandpa, I managed to say, my voice cracking dangerously. I didn't know you were coming. I never got any letters. Something flickered across his face. Understanding. Anger? A terrible, davening realization. But he kept smiling, kept holding me at arm's length so he could look at me properly. Of course I came, it's Christmas, and I wanted to see my favorite granddaughter. He pulled me close again, and I felt tears burning my eyes. Then he said the words that would detonate my entire world. And I wanted to see what you thought of your house, the one I bought you in November. $480,000 for that beautiful craftsman near the university. Your father sent me photos of you standing in front of it, looking so happy. Did you like the built-in bookshelves? I had them add, I know how much you love to read. Aurora. He pushed through the crowd, and before I could process what was happening, he pulled me into the tightest hug I had received in years. I felt tears burning my eyes. My beautiful girl. I've missed you so much. Did you get my letters? I wrote you every month. Letters. I never received any letters. Grandpa. I didn't know you were coming. I managed to say, my voice cracking. Of course I came, it's Christmas, and I wanted to see my favorite granddaughter. He pulled back and looked at me with such genuine affection that something in my chest cracked. Then he said the words that changed everything. And I wanted to see what you thought of your house, the one I bought you in November. $480,000 for that beautiful craftsman near the university. Your father sent me photos of you standing in front of it. Did you like the built-in bookshelves I had them add? I know how much you love to read. The room went completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every glass paused midway to lips. Even the Christmas music seemed to fade into nothing. I felt the blood drain from my face. What house? Grandpa Arthur's smile faltered. I looked confused. The house I bought for you, in November, near your university. I wired Richard $480,000 to purchase it in your name. He sent me photos of you outside it. Said, you cried when you got the keys. I had never cried over keys. I had never stood outside any house. I was still living in a 400-square-foot apartment with a radiator that barely worked. Across the room, Richard had gone white as a ghost. Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. Liana's mouth hung open in shock. Richard! Grandpa Arthur's voice changed completely. Gone was the jolly grandfather. In his place stood the sharp-eyed businessman who had built a real estate empire from nothing. What is going on? Dad. I can explain. Richard stammered. There was a misunderstanding with the paperwork and What paperwork? I heard myself say. My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from underwater. I never signed any paperwork. I never even knew about this. Grandpa Arthur turned back to Richard, and I watched my father shrink under that gaze. You told me Aurora specifically requested that house. You sent me inspection reports with her notes in the margins. You sent me photos of her at the closing. Are you telling me that was all a lie? The silence was deafening. I could feel every eye in the room on us. Richard's business associates, Victoria's friends, distant relatives we saw once a year. Everyone was watching the Blackwood family perfect facade crack wide open. Richard, I'm waiting. Grandpa Arthur's voice was ice. Where is the house I bought for my granddaughter? Victoria tried to salvage it. She always did. Arthur, you're confused. The holidays can be so overwhelming and I am not confused. He cut her off with such authority that she actually stepped back. I am 82 years old and I still run a $50 million company. My mind is perfectly clear, and I know exactly what I wired to my son for Aurora's house. So I'll ask one more time. Where is the house? Richard's face crumbled. I watched 20 years of lies catch up to him in a single moment. The house is in Liana's name. It was for her college fund, and we thought you wouldn't mind if you stole from Aurora. Grandpa Arthur's voice could have frozen fire. If you took money I gave specifically for her and gave it to your other daughter instead, if you forged documents and fabricated evidence to deceive me, we were going to pay her back. Victoria jumped in, her voice shrill. It was just a loan, and we knew Aurora wouldn't mind helping her sister. Did you ask her? Grandpa Arthur looked at me. Did anyone ask you if you wanted to give up nearly $500,000 for your sister? I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. 23 years of being invisible, of being forgotten, of convincing myself that I was being too sensitive, that I was imagining things, that my family did love me in their own way. All of it crystallized into this one perfect moment of absolute clarity. They had stolen from me. Not just money. They had stolen my grandfather's love, intercepted his letters, lied about his health, and used my name to commit fraud. And they had done it without even thinking I was important enough to notice. The wooden box slipped from my hands and crashed to the floor. The mother-of-pearl snowflake cracked right down the middle. Aurora, sweetheart. Let's talk about this privately. Richard started toward me, but Grandpa Arthur stepped between us. Don't you dare touch her. Aurora, go pack a bag. You're coming to Denver with me. Tonight? Dad, you can't just take her. Richard's voice rose in desperation. She's my daughter, and she stopped being your daughter the moment you used her name to steal from me. Grandpa Arthur's words were final. And if you try to stop her from leaving, I will call the police right now and have you arrested for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Do you understand me? I found my voice then. It came from somewhere deep inside. Somewhere I didn't know existed. Somewhere my mother's strength had been hiding all these years. How long I looked at Richard, then Victoria, then Liana. How long have you been using me? No one answered. Liana started crying, her perfect makeup running down her face. But her tears didn't move me anymore. I had seen her cry too many times to manipulate me, to make herself the victim when I was the one hurt. How many of his letters did you hide? How many times did he try to see me and you told him I didn't want to see him? How many lies did you tell about me to keep his money flowing to you? Aurora, you don't understand the pressure we've been under. Victoria tried. The economy has been difficult and Liana's education is so expensive and I didn't matter. I said it calmly. 23 years of pain condensed into 4 words. I never mattered to any of you. I was just a name you could use, a signature you could forge, a person you could erase. I walked upstairs to my old bedroom. It had been converted into Victoria's craft room years ago, but I still kept a few things in the closet. I packed them in silence while Grandpa Arthur stood guard at the door. I could hear arguing downstairs. Liana sobbing, Richard's voice getting louder and more desperate. Victoria trying to control the situation she could no longer control. When I came back down with my single duffel bag, the party guests had all quietly left. Only my family remained in the wreckage of their perfect Christmas. Richard tried one more time to stop me. Aurora, please. We can fix this. We're your family. I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who had never come to a single one of my school plays, who had missed my high school graduation because of a golf tournament, who had forgotten my birthday for 12 years straight, who had used me as a prop in his scheme to defraud his own father. "No," I said quietly. "You're not my family. You're people who share my DNA. There's a difference." Liana grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. Her fingers dug in desperately. "Rory, please. You can't do this to us. We'll lose everything. The house, my school, everything. Mom and Dad will be destroyed. How can you be so cruel?" I looked down at her hand on my arm. 21 years old, and she had never worked a day in her life. Never paid a bill. Never knew what it was like to eat ramen for a week because rent was due. She had taken everything I should have had and called it love. "My name is Aurora," I said, pulling my arm free. "And I'm not being cruel. I'm just finally stopping being stupid." I walked out of that house and didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Victoria shouting, Richard pleading, Liana crying. The sounds of a family falling apart, or maybe just revealing what it had always been. A beautiful lie. Grandpa Arthur drove us to Denver through the night. I sat in the passenger seat of his Mercedes and watched Colorado pass by in darkness. He didn't try to make small talk or comfort me. He just drove. After about an hour, I started crying. Not quiet tears, but huge, gulping sobs that came from somewhere so deep I hadn't known it existed. All the years of swallowing my pain, of making myself small, of hoping that if I was just good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, they would finally see me. It all came pouring out on that dark highway. Grandpa Arthur reached over and held my hand. "Let it out, sweetheart. You've earned these tears." We arrived at his Denver penthouse at 3 a.m. It was sleek and modern, all windows and light even in the darkness. He showed me to a guest room that was bigger than my entire apartment. The bed had soft white linens. There were fresh towels in the bathroom. A robe hung on the door. Simple things, but they felt like luxury after years of making do with nothing. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow we start figuring this out." I slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, sun was streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and I could see the Denver skyline spread out before me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Grandpa Arthur was waiting for me in the kitchen with coffee and bagels. And something else? 3 cardboard boxes stacked on his dining table. "I've been documenting everything," he said quietly, "for the past 5 years. Every time something felt off about Richard's reports about you, I kept records. I didn't want to believe my own son would lie to me. But I couldn't ignore the inconsistencies anymore. We spent the next 3 days going through those boxes. It was worse than I had imagined. So much worse. The house in my name wasn't the only thing Richard had stolen. There was a college trust fund my grandfather had set up when I was born. $300,000 that should have paid for my entire education, plus living expenses. Richard had drained it completely. The bank statements showed withdrawals for Liana's private school tuition, Victoria's shopping trips to Europe, a Mercedes for Liana's 16th birthday. My education fund had become their personal ATM. There was the inheritance from my mother, $42,000 that her parents had left for me before they passed away when I was 10. Richard had gotten himself appointed as trustee and spent every penny on renovating their master bathroom with Italian marble. There were credit cards opened in my name, $23,000 in debt that had destroyed my credit score before I even knew what credit was. They had been using my social security number since I was 18. There were the letters. Dozens of them. Letters Grandpa Arthur had written me every month for 5 years. Asking about my life. Sending money for birthdays and holidays. Telling me he loved me. Letters I had never received because Richard had intercepted them all. Letters I had desperately needed when I was working 3 jobs and eating 1 meal a day to afford textbooks. But the worst were the lies they had told about me. Emails Richard had sent to Grandpa Arthur. Supposedly from me. Saying I was too busy to visit. That I had a serious boyfriend Arthur wouldn't approve of. That I was going through a rebellious phase, and it was better if we didn't talk. Forged documents with my signature, photos they had manipulated to make it look like I was receiving the gifts and money Grandpa Arthur sent. They had systematically erased me from my grandfather's life while using my identity to steal from him. And they had done it with such cold calculation that I couldn't even call it a mistake. This was planned. This was intentional. This was evil. On the third day, I stood in front of the windows overlooking Denver, and I made a promise to myself. They would pay, not just for the money, for every Christmas I spent alone, for every birthday they forgot, for every time they made me feel like I was crazy for wanting to be loved, for stealing my mother's memory and my grandfather's love, and 23 years of my life. They would pay for all of it. Grandpa Arthur made some calls. By the end of the week, I was sitting across from Eleanor Shaw in her corner office at one of Denver's most prestigious law firms. Eleanor was in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that could cut glass. She had built her career on winning impossible cases, and she didn't lose. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a legal pad. So I did. Every detail, every hurt, every theft. Eleanor took notes without expression. When I finished, she looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "This is going to be brutal," she said bluntly. "They're not going to go quietly. They're going to fight back. Try to make you look like the villain. Drag your name through the mud. Can you handle that?" I thought about the wooden box lying broken on the floor, about the letters I had written, pouring out my heart, begging to be loved, about the girl who had made herself invisible trying to earn affection from people who saw her as nothing but a resource to exploit. "Yes," I said, "I can handle it." Eleanor smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark who just spotted blood in the water. "Good. Let's destroy them." The first thing we did was file a police report. I walked into the Denver Police Department and formally reported my father for identity theft, fraud, and forgery. The detective assigned to my case was a woman named Martinez, who had seen too many financial abuse cases. She looked at the evidence Eleanor provided, and her jaw tightened. "This is systematic exploitation," she said, "and they did it to their own daughter. We'll need to coordinate with authorities in your home state. But Ms. Blackwood, you have a strong case here." Next, Eleanor froze all the credit accounts in my name. She filed disputes with all 3 credit bureaus. She sent cease and desist letters to Richard and Victoria, and she filed a civil lawsuit for the return of all stolen funds. Plus interest, plus dommage. The lawsuit hit Richard like a bomb. Within hours, my phone started ringing. I had blocked their numbers, but they found ways around it. Texts from unknown numbers, emails from new accounts, messages through Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. Richard begging, threatening, demanding I drop the lawsuit. Victoria playing victim, claiming I was destroying the family. Leanna sending voice messages of herself crying, saying I was killing Dad, that he might have a heart attack from the stress. I deleted every message without reading past the first line. Eleanor had advised me to keep them as evidence of harassment, but otherwise ignore them completely. Never let them see you react. She said, "The moment you engage, you give them power." But they didn't stop. They couldn't. Their entire life was built on manipulation, and I was no longer playing along. Richard showed up at Grandpa Arthur's building. Security turned him away. He came back 3 more times before Arthur got a restraining order. Victoria started posting on social media, carefully worded messages about ungrateful children and family betrayal, trying to turn public opinion against me without saying my name. Their friends started commenting, offering support, completely unaware of the truth. Eleanor handled that too. She sent a letter to Victoria's lawyer with copies of the evidence and a simple message: "Stop the social media campaign or we add defamation to the lawsuit." The post stopped. In the middle of all this legal chaos, Grandpa Arthur did something that changed my life. He sat me down one evening with a photo album I had never seen before. "These are pictures of your mother," he said softly. "Richard wouldn't let me show you before. He said it was too painful, that you needed to move on. But that was another lie." I turned the pages with shaking hands. My mother as a little girl, gap-toothed and fearless. My mother in high school, captain of the debate team. My mother in college, graduating top of her class with a degree in environmental science. My mother on her wedding day, looking radiant, but with something sad in her eyes. She was brilliant. Grandpa Arthur said, strong, independent, creative. She reminded me so much of my own mother. When she married Richard, I had doubts. He was charming, but there was something hollow underneath. But she loved him, so I supported her choice. He turned to a page near the end. My mother pregnant, her hand on her belly, smiling but tired. She was so happy when she found out about you. She had all these plans. She wanted to be an environmental architect, design sustainable buildings. She wanted to teach you to be strong, to stand up for yourself, to never let anyone make you feel small. What happened? I whispered. Grandpa Arthur's face, aged 10 years. She died 6 months after you were born. They said it was sudden heart failure, but I always wondered. Richard remarried so fast. And Victoria was already in the picture before your mother passed. I've always suspected he was having an affair, but I could never prove it. I looked at the photos of my mother and I saw myself. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same stubborn chin. I looked nothing like Richard. Everything like her. She loved you so much. Aurora, in the 6 months she had with you, you were her entire world. The money she left, the trust fund she set up, that was supposed to give you opportunities, that was supposed to help you become the woman she knew you could be. I cried then. Not for the money they stole, but for the mother I never knew. For the life she had planned for us. For the strength she had wanted to give me. She would be so proud of you. Grandpa Arthur said, pulling me close. For standing up. For fighting back. For refusing to be invisible anymore. That night, I made another vow. I would become the woman my mother wanted me to be. And I would make sure Richard and Victoria never forgot what they had taken from both of us. Eleanor moved fast. Within 2 weeks, we had formal charges filed. The district attorney in Richards County took the case personally. After reviewing the evidence, identity theft was serious. Financial exploitation of family members was serious. The amounts involved made it felony territory. Richard hired a lawyer. A good one. But good lawyers can't defend against documentary evidence. We had bank statements, forged signatures, emails, witness testimony from Grandpa Arthur. We had everything. Richard tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that I had given permission verbally. Eleanor destroyed that argument by pointing out I had been a minor when some of the theft occurred and legally couldn't give permission. Victoria tried to claim she knew nothing about it. Eleanor produced emails showing Victoria had actively participated in the fraud, including one where she discussed how to forge my signature more convincingly. Leanna tried to position herself as another victim. But Eleanor found social media posts where Leanna had bragged about the house, the car, the European vacations, all funded by money stolen from me. There was no defense, only deflection and lies, and the truth was finally louder. While the criminal case built momentum, I focused on rebuilding my life. Grandpa Arthur helped me enroll in a prestigious architecture program at the University of Denver. It was one of the top programs in the country, and I had been accepted before but couldn't afford it. Now, with my credit restored and my grandfather's support, I could finally pursue the dream I had put on hold. The first day of classes, I met a professor who would change everything. Professor David Sterling was in his 60s, with a reputation for being brilliant and impossible to please. His design philosophy was simple. Architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about creating spaces where people feel safe, seen, and valued. He took one look at my portfolio, filled with designs I had sketched over the years, and said, "You design homes like someone who never had one." It was the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about me. Under Professor Sterling's guidance, I threw myself into my work. I designed homes with open floor plans that couldn't hide secrets. I created spaces with natural light that exposed darkness. I built structures with strong foundations that couldn't be shaken. Every design was a response to my childhood. A promise that I would create spaces where no one would ever feel invisible. My classmates noticed, especially one student, Ethan Morrison. He was tall, with dark, curly hair and kind eyes, working on his master's degree while I worked on my bachelor's. He approached me after a critique session where I had presented a design for a community housing project. "Your work is incredible," he said, "but it's also kind of heartbreaking. Every building you design feels like a fortress and a sanctuary at the same time." I should have been defensive. Instead, I found myself telling him the truth. Not all of it. Not yet, but enough. That I had come from a difficult family situation. That I was learning to rebuild my life. That architecture was my way of creating the safety I never had. Ethan didn't pry. He just listened. And then he said something I hadn't expected. I'd like to help. If you'll let me. I'm really good at documentation and organization. If you ever need someone to help keep your projects on track, I'm your guy. It was such a simple offer, but it meant everything. For the first time, someone was offering to support me without wanting something in return. Ethan became my closest friend at school. He helped me organize my portfolio. He reminded me to eat when I got lost in designs. He made me laugh when the stress of the lawsuit threatened to overwhelm me. And slowly, carefully, he became more than a friend. But while I was building something new in Denver, the war with my family was escalating. Richard, backed into a corner by the criminal charges and civil lawsuit, started fighting dirty. He showed up at the construction site where Grandpa Arthur's company was building a new development. He started spreading rumors that Arthur was senile, that the company was being run into the ground, that investors should pull out before it was too late. Arthur's business partners started getting anonymous emails with falsified financial statements, making it look like the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Property reviews on major sites suddenly filled with complaints about construction defects and delays that never happened. Eleanor traced the emails back to an IP address registered to Victoria. They're trying to destroy his business. Eleanor said grimly in our meeting. If they can prove Arthur is incompetent or broke, they can argue he was confused about the money he gave you. It's a desperate move, but it might work if we don't shut it down fast. Grandpa Arthur was calm. Too calm. Let them try, he said. I've been building my reputation for 60 years. Their lies can't touch it. But then Richard made his biggest mistake. He came to my university. I was walking out of studio class on a Wednesday afternoon, my arms full of presentation boards, when I heard his voice behind me. Aurora. Stop. We need to talk. I froze. I hadn't seen him in person since Christmas Eve. Hadn't heard his voice except in angry voicemails I deleted without listening to. For a second, that old fear crept up my spine. The fear of disappointing him, of being too difficult, of causing problems. Then I remembered the trust fund, the stolen inheritance, the forged letters, the 23 years of being invisible. I turned around. Richard looked terrible. He had lost weight. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. There were dark circles under his eyes. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You need to leave, I said quietly. Aurora, please. You have to drop this lawsuit. You're destroying your family. Students were starting to stare. I could feel their eyes on us, curious and concerned. I don't have a family, I said. I have a father who committed fraud. There's a difference. Don't do this. His voice rose. Don't throw away 23 years over money. We can work this out. We can pay you back if you just give us time. This isn't about money. I kept my voice level. This is about you using my name to commit crimes. This is about you stealing from your own father. This is about you making me invisible for my entire life, and then being surprised when I finally stood up. You ungrateful little Richard caught himself, but the damage was done. The mask slipped, and I saw what had always been there underneath. Not love. Not even indifference. Just rage that I had dared to stop being useful. I'm not ungrateful, I said clearly. I'm just done being used. Your mother would be ashamed of you. Richard spat out. It was meant to hurt. It was meant to make me crumble. Instead, I felt something break free inside me. My mother would be ashamed of you, I said, for everything you did to her daughter, for stealing her legacy, for erasing her memory. She loved me, even if you never could. I walked away. Behind me, Richard was shouting, but I didn't hear the words. Students had formed a protective circle around me, blocking his path. I saw Ethan running toward me from across the quad. Professor Sterling emerged from the building, his face stern. Campus security arrived within minutes. Richard was escorted off the property with a warning that he would be arrested for trespassing if he returned. An official no-contact order was filed with the university. I sat in Professor Sterling's office, shaking with adrenaline, while Ethan held my hand and the professor called Eleanor. He's getting desperate. Eleanor said when she arrived an hour later. That's good. Desperate people make mistakes. We're going to use this. She filed an emergency restraining order based on the harassment. The judge granted it immediately. Noting the pattern of escalating behavior, Richard was now legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me. Grandpa Arthur. Or Arthur's business. But Richard didn't stop. He couldn't. Losing control of me meant losing control of everything. Victoria launched a social media campaign, carefully sidestepping the defamation warnings. She posted vague messages about elder abuse and troubled young women manipulating elderly relatives. She shared articles about grandparents being scammed by grandchildren. She joined Facebook groups for families estranged from adult children and painted herself as a victim of a vindictive stepdaughter. It was masterful gaslighting, and it might have worked. Except Eleanor was better at this game. Eleanor prepared a press release with the full story, supported by court documents, bank statements, and expert testimony. She sent it to every major news outlet in Denver and Richard's home state, along with a detailed explanation of the fraud case. But she didn't release it publicly yet. Instead, she sent it to Victoria's lawyer with a simple message: stop the social media campaign or we go public with everything. Victoria's posts vanished overnight. Liana tried a different approach. She started showing up at my classes, crying in hallways, creating scenes designed to make me look cruel. She sent hundreds of text messages from new numbers I couldn't block. Dad's in the hospital because of you. Mom's having a breakdown. You're destroying our family. How can you be so heartless? Each message was calculated to trigger guilt, to make me feel responsible, to make me come back and fix things like I always had. I forwarded every message to Eleanor and blocked every number. I was done being manipulated. The turning point came on a cold February morning. I was working on a design project in the studio when my phone rang. Unknown number. I usually didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Aurora Blackwood, a professional female voice. Yes, this is Detective Martinez. I wanted to inform you that we've concluded our investigation. We have sufficient evidence to proceed with formal charges against Richard Blackwood for identity theft, Vierefraud, and forgery. The district attorney is pursuing maximum penalties. I thought you'd want to know. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. Thank you for telling me. Ms. Blackwood. Detective Martinez's voice softened slightly. What your father did to you. The systematic exploitation. The psychological manipulation. I've seen a lot in this job, but this case stood out. I want you to know that you did the right thing coming forward. People like him don't stop on their own. They need to be stopped. After I hung up, I sat in the empty studio and cried. Not from sadness. From relief. From finally being believed. From knowing that the little girl who had been invisible for so long was finally being seen. Ethan found me there an hour later. He didn't ask questions. Just sat down next to me and put his arm around my shoulders. We sat in comfortable silence until I was ready to talk. It's almost over, I said quietly. The investigation is done. They're filing charges. How do you feel? I thought about it. Free. Scared. Angry. Relieved. All at once. That sounds about right, Ethan said. He had gradually learned the full story over the past few months. He had never once judged me or suggested I should forgive and move on. He just supported me. It was a new feeling, being supported without conditions. Can I tell you something? I asked. Always. For the first time in my life. I'm not trying to make myself smaller. I'm not trying to be easy or quiet or forgive people who hurt me just to keep the peace. I'm taking up space and standing my ground, and it's terrifying and amazing. Ethan smiled. You're not invisible anymore. No, I agreed. I'm not. That evening, Eleanor called with news. The civil suit is going to trial next month. But Richard's lawyer approached me with a settlement offer. He wants to negotiate. What are they offering? I asked. Full restitution of all stolen funds. Plus interest. They'll surrender the house they bought with your money. Victoria will sign a confession admitting her part. And they'll agree to a permanent no-contact order. It was everything we had asked for. Everything I deserved. But there was a catch. There was always a catch. In exchange, Eleanor continued. They want you to ask the district attorney to reduce the criminal charges. No jail time for Richard. Probation only. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No. You're sure this would end things quickly? Get you your money back. And… no, I repeated firmly. This isn't just about money. He committed crimes. He stole from his own child. From his father. He forged documents. He destroyed my credit. He psychologically abused me for 23 years. And he did it all without a second thought because he never believed I mattered enough to fight back. He needs to face real consequences. Not probation. Not a slap on the wrist. Real consequences. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. It was a real laugh. Full of genuine respect. I was hoping you'd say that. Let's take them to court. The trial was brutal. Richard's lawyer tried every tactic. He painted me as a manipulative gold digger who had seduced my sick grandfather into turning against his own son. He suggested I had forged the evidence. He claimed I had stolen money from my family and then blamed them when caught. None of it worked. The evidence was too solid. The paper trail was too clear. And most importantly, I was too calm. I sat on that witness stand and answered every question truthfully and quietly. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just told the truth. When Richard's lawyer tried to make me emotional by asking about my childhood, suggesting I was exaggerating my mistreatment, I looked directly at the jury and said I spent 23 years trying to become visible to my father. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college while he spent my inheritance on marble bathrooms. I went hungry so I could buy textbooks while he paid for my sister's trips to Paris. And when his own father tried to give me a house, he stole it without hesitation. If that's love in your family, I'm glad I left mine. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Richard guilty on all counts. Identity theft, wire fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a family member. The judge, a woman in her 60s who reminded me of Professor Sterling, looked at Richard with open disgust. Mr. Blackwood, you systematically exploited your own daughter for financial gain. You stole her mother's inheritance. You destroyed her credit. You intercepted her grandfather's attempts to help her. And you did it all while maintaining a facade of respectability. This court finds your actions reprehensible. I'm sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of probation. You will also pay full restitution of $873,000. Plus interest. To Aurora Blackwood. Richard's face went white. Victoria, sitting behind him, burst into tears. Leanna ran from the courtroom. I felt nothing, just a quiet sense that justice had finally been served. The aftermath was messy. Victoria filed for divorce within a week. She claimed she had been manipulated by Richard, that she was another victim. The court didn't buy it. She was ordered to pay back her portion of the stolen money and received a suspended sentence for her role in the fraud. The house at Maple Hollow Lane was put up for sale to pay restitution. Victoria and Leanna had to move into a small apartment in a neighborhood that was a far cry from their previous luxury. Leanna had to drop out of her expensive private college and transfer to a community college. She got a job at a shopping mall to help pay rent. Their perfect life, built on money stolen from me, collapsed completely. Meanwhile, I was thriving. Under Professor Sterling's mentorship, my design for a sustainable community housing project won a prestigious national award. The concept was simple: create affordable housing that didn't feel cheap or shameful. Design spaces where everyone, regardless of income, could feel valued and safe. The prize came with a $50,000 grant and an offer to help develop the project in a low-income neighborhood outside Denver. It was everything I had dreamed of: creating homes where people wouldn't feel invisible, where everyone would have a space that was truly theirs. Ethan was there when I got the news. We had been officially dating for 6 months by then, taking things slowly, building something real on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. When I told him about the award, he picked me up and spun me around in the middle of the campus quad. "You did it," he said, grinning. "You took everything they tried to use to break you and turned it into something beautiful." Grandpa Arthur hosted a dinner to celebrate. It was small and intimate. Just him, me, Ethan, Professor Sterling, Eleanor, and Detective Martinez. We ate good food and drank wine and toasted to justice and new beginnings. Halfway through dinner, Grandpa Arthur stood up to make a speech. Aurora, when I first met you as a baby, your mother made me promise something. She said, Dad, if anything happens to me, promise you'll make sure Aurora knows she's loved. Promise, you'll make sure she becomes strong. I failed that promise for a long time. Richard kept me away and I let him. But you kept that promise yourself. You became strong without me, and I am so incredibly proud of the woman you've become. Everyone applauded. I cried. Happy tears this time. Healing tears. Later that night, after everyone had left, I stood on Grandpa Arthur's balcony looking out at Denver. The city lights sparkled like stars. I thought about the girl I had been a year ago. Invisible. Hurt. Desperate to be loved by people who saw her as nothing but a tool. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who refused to be erased. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. My heart sank, thinking it was another attempt by Richard or Victoria to manipulate me. But it was Leanna. Aurora. I'm sorry. For everything. You were right. About all of it. I was a pawn and I didn't want to see it. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to do better. I'm in therapy. I got a job. I'm paying my own way now. I understand if you never want to talk to me again. But if you ever do, I'll be here. Love. Lily. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, to keep that door closed forever. But another part of me, the part that remembered the little girl Leanna had been before our parents twisted her, felt something soften. I didn't respond. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I didn't delete it either. I saved it. Filed it away as possibility. Redemption was possible. Forgiveness was possible. But it had to be earned. Not demanded. And it couldn't happen until I was ready. The house on Maple Hollow Lane sold for $520,000. $40,000 more than the original purchase price. The money went into my account, along with the restitution payments from Victoria and the liquidation of assets Richard had accumulated. In total, I received $912,000. It was more money than I had ever imagined having, but it wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about being seen, about mattering, about refusing to be invisible anymore. I used the money wisely. I paid off my student loans. I set up a trust fund for my future, one that no one could touch but me. I put a significant portion toward developing my community housing project. And I bought a small condo in Denver, my first real home, with big windows and open spaces and not a single shadow to hide in. Ethan helped me move in. We spent the weekend painting walls and assembling furniture and making the space mine. On Sunday night, we sat on my new couch surrounded by boxes and takeout containers. Exhausted and happy. How does it feel? Ethan asked. Having your own place. I thought about it. About the bedroom at Maple Hollow Lane that had never really been mine. About the tiny apartment where I had worked 3 jobs to afford rent. About the years of feeling like a guest in my own life. It feels like coming home, I said. For the first time ever. 2 years later, I graduated with my architecture degree and immediately got hired by a prestigious firm in Denver. My community housing project broke ground 6 months after that. On opening day, I stood in front of the first completed unit and watched a single mother with 2 kids get her keys. She cried when she saw the space. Sunlight streaming through large windows. An open kitchen where she could watch her kids play. A bedroom door that locked from the inside for safety and privacy. Built-in bookshelves like the ones Grandpa Arthur had wanted to give me. This is really ours, she asked. Disbelieving. Yes, I said. It's really yours. She hugged me. Thank you. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means. But I did know. I knew exactly what it meant to finally have a space that was yours. To finally feel like you mattered. Grandpa Arthur retired officially that year and made me a partner in his consulting firm. Not out of obligation or pity, but because I had proven myself. I had taken his lessons about building strong foundations and applied them not just to buildings but to life. Richard served 3 years of his 5-year sentence before being released on parole. I heard about it through Eleanor, but I didn't react. He was a stranger to me now. A cautionary tale about what happens when you treat people as resources instead of human beings. Victoria rebuilt her life slowly. She got a real job for the first time in her life, working as a receptionist. She stopped posting on social media. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had finally started going to therapy. Liana kept texting occasionally. Nothing demanding, just updates. She finished her associate's degree. She got promoted at her job. She started volunteering at a women's shelter. Each message was another step toward becoming a person instead of a prop in someone else's story. After 2 years of updates with no response from me, she sent one final message. I know you might never be ready to talk. I understand. But I want you to know that watching you stand up for yourself changed my life. You showed me what strength looks like, what real love looks like. And even though I lost my sister, I found myself. So thank you for being brave enough to save yourself. It helped me learn to save myself too. I cried when I read that, not from sadness, but from the complicated tangle of emotions that comes with healing, with letting go, with accepting that people can change, but the past can't be erased. I wrote back one sentence. When you're ready to build something real, instead of something built on lies, I'll be here. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was possibility. And that was enough for now. 3 years after that Christmas Eve, I stood in a beautiful garden in Denver marrying Ethan. It was a small ceremony. Grandpa Arthur walked me down the aisle, beaming with pride. Professor Sterling officiated. Eleanor was my maid of honor. My chosen family, the one I had built from scratch, surrounded us with love. As I said my vows, I thought about the wooden box that had shattered on Christmas Eve, about the letters inside begging to be seen, about the girl who had written them, still believing she could earn love through sacrifice. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew that real love didn't require you to disappear. Real love made you more visible, more yourself, more free. In the audience, I spotted an unexpected guest. Leanna, sitting in the back row, dressed simply, crying quietly. We had started talking again 6 months earlier. Slow conversations over coffee. Awkward at first, then gradually easier. She was learning to be her own person. I was learning that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, but it could mean moving forward. Our eyes met across the garden. She smiled, genuine and warm. I smiled back. It wasn't the relationship we might have had if things had been different, but it was real, and that made it worth more than any fantasy of what could have been. After the ceremony, Grandpa Arthur pulled me aside. He was 85 now, moving slower but still sharp as ever. Your mother would be so proud of you, he said, his eyes wet with tears. You became exactly who she hoped you would be. Strong, compassionate, creative, and brave enough to stand up for yourself. I learned from the best, I said, hugging him tight. No, he said firmly. You learned from pain, but you chose to turn that pain into purpose. That was all you. Sweetheart. Never forget that. Now, as I sit here writing this, it's been 5 years since that Christmas Eve. 5 years since I walked out of Maple Hollow Lane and decided I would rather be alone than invisible. 5 years since I stopped trying to earn love from people who didn't know how to give it. My life now looks nothing like I imagined it would. I'm a successful architect, specializing in community housing. My projects have won awards and changed lives. I'm married to my best friend. I have a grandfather who loves me unconditionally. I have a sister I'm slowly learning to have a relationship with. I have a mother, whose memory I carry with me in every building I design. And most importantly, I have myself. I know my worth. I know my strength. I know that I am visible, that I matter, that I deserve to take up space in this world. The scars are still there. Sometimes I still struggle with feeling like I'm too much or not enough. Sometimes I still have nightmares about being back in that house, invisible and forgotten. But those moments get rarer. And when they come, I have people who remind me that I'm not that girl anymore. I'm Aurora Blackwood. I survived being erased, and I built myself back into someone I'm proud to be. So here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever sacrificed yourself trying to earn love from people who couldn't see you? And most importantly, what did it take for you to finally stand up and say enough? Drop your story in the comments. like this. If it resonated with you, subscribe because I'm going to keep sharing these stories of survival and strength. We're not alone in this. There are so many of us who had to learn that loving ourselves is more important than being loved by people who never deserved us in the first place. And remember, you're not invisible. You never were. You were just surrounded by people too small to see how bright you shine.